On a rainy afternoon, Emily's world fell apart. The hospital corridors echoed with muted voices and the persistent beeping of monitors. The air was thick with the scent of antiseptic, a smell that would forever haunt her memories. She clutched her father's hand tightly as they stood outside the room, where her mother lay motionless, surrounded by machines that had finally been silenced. Emily's mother and had been battling a terminal illness for months, her once vibrant spirit gradually dimming. Her father John had done everything he could to keep the family together during this challenging time. His own health was deteriorating under the weight of stress and grief. Now the inevitable had arrived. Emily, at 13, felt the crushing weight of loss settle heavily on her young shoulders. As doctors and nurses hurried about, their expressions were a mix of practiced detachment and fleeting sympathy. John held Emily close. His eyes, red-rimmed and filled with unshed tears, met hers. "She's at peace now, Emily," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. Emily nodded silently, her throat too tight to speak. The words seemed hollow, a weak consolation in the face of such overwhelming sadness. Days passed in a blur of condolences and funeral arrangements. The house, once filled with laughter and warmth, now felt cold and empty. Emily found solace in her books and sketches, retreating into the worlds of fantasy she had always loved. The walls of her room, adorned with drawings of mythical creatures and far-off places, became her refuge. But reality soon intruded harshly. Just a few months after Anne's passing, John began to spend more time away from home. His job in the city, already demanding, seemed to swallow him whole. Long hours turned into longer absences, leaving Emily alone with her thoughts and her grief. The large house, filled with echoes of happier times, now felt like a void. Then came the day John returned with a woman by his side. Samantha, with her polished demeanor and false kindness, smiled too brightly at Emily. "I'll take care of her," she assured John, her voice saccharine sweet. "She'll be just fine." Emily watched silently as Samantha rearranged their home, imposing her taste and rules. The familiar scents of her mother's cooking were replaced with sterile, perfumed air. The cozy living room, once a sanctuary of family time, now looked like a page out of a glossy magazine. Emily missed her mother fiercely, resenting Samantha's presence for trying to fill a void that could never be filled. As weeks turned into months, Samantha's true nature began to show. The moment John left for the city, Samantha's friendly mask slipped. She was cruel and vindictive, finding pleasure in making Emily's life miserable. Emily was forced to sleep in the old treehouse in the backyard, while Samantha and her children slept in the cozy bedrooms. The treehouse, once a place of childhood adventures, now felt like a prison. Nights were cold and lonely, the sounds of the night amplified in the silence. One particularly harsh day, Samantha assigned Emily to work in the farthest corner of their farm, clearing weeds and thorns. The sun was scorching and Emily's hands were blistered and sore. As she worked, she felt a sharp pain in her leg. Looking down, she saw a snake slithering away. Panic set in as the pain intensified. Spreading quickly, she screamed for help, but the house was too far for anyone to hear. By some stroke of luck, Mr. Jacobs, their neighbor, was passing by and heard her cries. Rushing over, he found Emily, pale and sweating, barely conscious. Without hesitation, he carried her to his car and sped to the hospital. The doctor said she was lucky to be alive. The venom had been potent, but timely intervention saved her. During her recovery, Mr. Jacobs often visited, bringing books and treats. His kindness and genuine concern contrasted sharply with Samantha's cruelty. Emily began to see him as a father figure, someone she could trust. The bond they formed was strong, built on shared moments of kindness and understanding. But the respite was brief. Once Emily was well enough to return home, Samantha's cruelty resumed with a vengeance. Emily bore it silently, her only solace, the fleeting moments she spent with Mr. Jacobs. The farm became a place of dread, each day blending into the next with chores and harsh words. One stormy night, Emily sat by her bedroom window, watching the rain lash against the glass. The dark clouds mirrored her mood, a turbulent mix of anger, sadness, and confusion. The faint sound of footsteps outside caught her attention. Peering through the curtains, she saw Mr. Jacobs standing in the shadows. His coat was pulled tight against the rain and his hat cast a shadow over his face. Heart racing with a mix of fear and hope, Emily hesitated before opening the window. A crack. "Emily," he whispered urgently, "I know a way out. I can take you to your father in the city. He needs to see you." His words sparked a flicker of hope in Emily's heart. The thought of seeing her father again, of escaping Samantha's suffocating presence, was too tempting to resist. Without hesitation, she gathered a few belongings and silently slipped out into the night, trusting Mr. Jacobs to lead her to safety. But as they ventured deeper into the darkness, the familiar streets of her neighborhood gave way to unfamiliar alleyways and desolate black roads. Emily began to sense something unsettling in Mr. Jacobs' demeanor. His friendly facade cracked, revealing a sinister intent lurking beneath. His grip on her arm tightened and his eyes gleamed with a predatory glint. Just as they reached the edge of town, Emily's apprehension turned into stark fear. When Mr. Jacobs veered off the main road into a deserted alley, the rain-soaked walls loomed high, and the distant sound of traffic faded into silence. "This way," he insisted, his voice taking on a menacing edge. Frozen with dread, Emily realized the trap she had fallen into. The alleyway seemed to close in around her, the shadows deepening as she struggled to keep her fear at bay. With a sinking feeling, she knew she had to act fast if she wanted to escape. But how desperation fueled her actions. As Mr. Jacobs reached for her, she twisted out of his grasp and bolted down the alley. Her footsteps echoed loudly, mingling with the pounding rain. The narrow passageways twisted and turned, offering little refuge behind her. She heard Mr. Jacobs' curses, his footsteps growing louder as he chased her. Emily's breath came in ragged gasps, her heart hammering in her chest. The dark rain-soaked streets blurred as she pushed herself to run faster. She had to find a way out, a place to hide, but the maze of alleyways seemed endless, and her fear threatened to overwhelm her. In a final burst of desperation, she spotted a small gap between two buildings. Squeezing through, she found herself in a narrow, hidden courtyard. The rain pounded down, masking her presence. She pressed herself against the wall, her body trembling with fear and exhaustion. The sound of Mr. Jacobs' footsteps grew faint, then fainted altogether. Emily dared not move, barely breathing as she listened for any sign of his return. Minutes felt like hours as she remained hidden, her mind racing with thoughts to escape. Finally, when she was sure he was gone, Emily emerged from her hiding place, soaking to the skin and shivering with cold. She knew she couldn't go home. Not yet. She had to find a way to reach her father.